Okay, let's go.
All right, we have final offseason grades for the AFC West. Starting with the Denver Broncos. The Denver Broncos were able to obtain some serious talent for Sean Payton's first year as a head coach. And although I do love him taking the helm, I don't know if it was really worth sending their only 2023 first-round pick, especially in a draft where they didn't have much draft capital. But the team did definitely improve this offseason during free agency. By adding guard Ben Powers and right tackle Mike McGlinchey, that offensive line has truly solidified and to be in a pretty good, potentially great offensive line, depending on how Sean Payton can develop them. With Javonte Williams potentially being hurt for a majority of this upcoming season, Perron should be able to compete for some carries, and I think that he's a pretty slept-on back with not a lot of miles to him. I also like them signing Zach Allen. I think he's going to be kind of that edge and 3-tech that they really need to help replace Jermont Jones, who I'll bring up here in a bit. And I also really like their draft picks. They were able to add, the explosive deep ball wide receiver Marvin Mims, and then also Drew Sanders, who should potentially add like a chess piece role as a linebacker edge potential mix there. And I also think there's a sleeper that they got in safety JL Skinner. When you're competing against the Chiefs 2 times a year, JL Skinner has a size to potentially, I'm not saying he will be, but could potentially line up against Travis Kelce. He does have some solid athleticism for being, I believe, 6'4". I think it's worth taking a late round flyer on a potential tight end killer. Meanwhile, again, like I mentioned, they only really lost Jermont Jones, who they potentially picked up and replaced with Zach Allen there. Again, overall, I think this team is much improved. I think that they could potentially compete for a wild card spot come playoffs next year. Overall, I'm going to give them an A. Up next, we have the Las Vegas Raiders. The Las Vegas Raiders were a pretty disappointing team once again this year. This offseason, they're looking to move on from the Derek Carr era and to compete with Jimmy G at quarterback. I don't really see that much of an improvement. However, the Raiders were able to add and retain some weapons with signing Jacoby Myers, who should fit in as a solid wide receiver 2 option, and Josh Jacobs returning at running back. The team also drafted pretty well, in my opinion. I do like the future of Tyree Wilson, who looks to start on the opposite side of Max Crosby, and Michael Mayer, who will be filling in for the recently traded Darren Waller. I also like the team even going after Aiden O'Connell in the 4th round, just as an insurance in case Jimmy G is in a full go. Aiden O'Connell does have some traits that could potentially carry on to the next level, so we'll see how that potentially develops for the Raiders. But, again, even with all these improvements, the team lost the linebacker Denzel Perriman, who I think is pretty slept on, safety Deron Harmon, and cornerback Rock Ya-Sin, who primarily played in the slot. And on top of that, like I mentioned earlier, they are moving on from Derek Carr and a top 5 tight end, when healthy, Darren Waller, who's also a solid player. Overall, the Raiders, again, didn't get much better this offseason. I don't think Jimmy G is really going to help make this team, push for a playoff picture. So I think that coming into the 2024 draft, the Raiders could be making, some calls to look at, making the leap on their guy, just depending on how this 2023 experiment goes with Jimmy G under the wheel. Overall, I'm going to give them a C. Again, I don't think this team got much better, but we'll see how it goes. Up next, we have the Kansas City Chiefs. The reigning Super Bowl champions had an interesting offseason. With Orlando Brown Jr., complaining about his contract, he ended up departing, and they went ahead and spent that money on a right tackle, Juwan Taylor. Again, I'm not a huge fan of this signing, but I do like them taking a flyer on Donovan Smith for a cheap deal, and I also like them signing edge rusher Charles Omenihu, who should help replace Frank Clark. The Chiefs did what they always do in the draft. They were able to find some suitable replacements for future aging contracts. Although I wish the team traded up a few spots for Miles Murphy, the team drafted edge rusher out of Kansas State, Felix Anudike-Uzomah, who has some solid upside. But my favorite picks are going to be Rashee Rice, who should compete for some outside reps at wide receiver, and Wanya Morris out of Oklahoma, who I think could develop nicely as a future right tackle. He just kind of gives me a Chiefs player vibe. But overall, the team, they're able to move on from Frank Clark pretty easily and Juju Smith-Schuster. Andrew Wiley, and Juan Thornhill. Overall, again, I think the Chiefs will always stay competitive with Mahomes as their quarterback. But again, overall, I don't think this roster really got better or worse. So I'm going to have to give them a B-. And lastly, we have the Los Angeles Chargers. Even though quiet, the Los Angeles Chargers were able to get a lot better this offseason. We weren't really a fan of them sticking their loyalty to head coach Brandon Staley, but I think their 2023 draft class is going to bring a much-needed punch into their fight with the Kansas City Chiefs for potentially the AFC West Championship. They added linebacker Eric Kendricks, who should potentially help linebacker Kenneth Murray in that linebacking core and potentially in stopping the run. I also like that they're able to keep their defensive lineman Morgan Fox and guard Trey Pipkins. But their draft was ultimately the most solid standout point, with them being able to bring in Quentin Johnston, who should help solidify a great wide receiver trio. They also were able to bring in defensive lineman Tuli Tuipulotu, who should hopefully put on some weight and compete for reps as a 3 technique, especially on pass rushing downs. And also, I do like them adding Deion Henley, who I think could be a true sleeper pick for this team's defense and their ultimate goal of improving their run deep. Overall, they weren't really able to improve that run defense through their interior D-line, which I'm not truly a fan of. But their true main departures were really only Drew Tranquill and safety Nasir Adderley, who it looks like they were able to replace in the draft. Again, overall, I'm going to have to give this team a B for their offseason. Again, I think that the Chargers did get a lot better, but it really all kind of relies on Brandon Staley and also on Justin Herbert's hands.